Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Kuruk, son of Yawgmoth. This is a mono-black deck sent to us as one of our donation decks of the week from Marcel. They say that, I feel that if someone plays removal often and every time they target my commander, I'm not able to set up a board because most of the creatures in the deck are high mana cost. Other improvements or advice are welcome. Thanks. And as for restrictions, they say not a crazy budget, but about $100. I'm assuming about $100 that we can add. As always, I do not add that much money in cards unless the deck itself is already thousands of dollars, because I always feel like there's smaller things we can get into and little adjustments that'll make the deck much better on a budget. That being said, before we get to looking at the commander, it's a good time to remind that, hey, we're almost at 1,000 subscribers. That may not be a big deal in the terms of YouTube, but it's a big deal to me. So if you're watching and considering subscribing, I would love that. But let's not dilly-dally any further and look at this wonderful mono-black paying life for mana deck. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Kuruk, son of Yawgmoth, and why are they, I believe, the most popular mono-black commander, but also the commander of this deck? Kuruk, son of Yawgmoth is a 7 mana, though deceptive, mono-black Phyrexian horror minion that's a 2/2. They have the Phyrexian mana symbols, which means you can pay life, 2 life per symbol as opposed to black mana. They have 3 abilities. The first one, just lifelink. The second one, for each black mana in a cost, you may pay 2 life rather than pay that mana, which makes every black mana symbol in our deck, as long as your commander is out, count as a Phyrexian black. This is a massive gain in mana because most people would pay 2 life over a mana any day of the week. And then finally, a kind of nice but not too important or consequential ability of whenever you cast a black spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Kuruk, son of Yawgmoth. All this to say, Kuruk is a 4 mana commander, right? I don't think you will ever pay that 7 as long as you're not bleeding too hard in mana. Then with that, with Kuruk out, all of your mana costs are now heavily reduced, and you can churn through your deck quicker and quicker, cast your bigger spells, and get ahead in the game. Looking at our deck, there is a kind of clear thing I want to point out, and it is our deck builder talks about how a lot of the creatures are high mana costs, but if we come down to our curve, we can see it is the deck itself that has a pretty high mana cost. We have this kind of plateauing element where 3, 5, and 7 are very high. And even if we do the math, like let's be very optimistic and say Kuruk is always out. And we start looking at around, let's say 4 mana creatures. We can say this is a 3 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana. And we go down, we can still see the majority of the creatures and spells are still a high amount of mana. Like 5 mana is still quite a bit, especially if you're burning through your life constantly, and to get a 5/6 flyer with a board clear, but we'll get back to that. I want to pick at some of these high mana cards, but I also want to point out the first and most important thing to me is that we have high mana cards that don't contain black mana symbols. Meteor Golem, for example, God Pharaoh's Gift, Elbrus, Dreamstone Hedron. At least the Hedron is ramp, but these cards cost a lot of mana and they don't really help. Like, that is not an easy way to cheat them out, so we are kind of hard casting them as intended, which is not the place we want to be. In addition, I noticed there's a lot of our lower mana cards, there's only like 1 mana symbol. So Dream Devour is a great example where we have a 1 and a black card, right? And if this was a black card, I'm not saying specifically Dream Devour, but any 2 mana card, if it was black, then it would be free off of Kuruk. With 1 and a black, we always have to pay that 1 mana, which isn't necessarily, once again, free and will add up. This cost reduction, since the deck is so reliant on it, it does make sense to me why your opponents are being very, very aggressive against you. But for the sake of this, what I'm going to do is, instead of going through the entire curve, let's look at the curve from, actually, I think we should briefly go over 4 and up, because like I said, and I've said a lot of times, I'm thinking of making some infographics for this to make it a little easier. But if our commander is 4 mana, we need to be careful what our 4 mana drops are, because every single one of these 4 drops competes with our commander, which is by far our favorite 4 mana card. So looking at our 4 drops, we've got a collection of creatures that I think are generally okay. Cards like Pitiless Plunderer and Sifter of Skulls work a lot better in Aristocrats deck, but I think they're pretty, fine to play here. As your creatures die, you'll get mana, or you will get treasures. Well, I guess that's also mana, and that's pretty nice. However, it is notable that they only have the 1 black mana symbol, and therefore will always be 3 mana. Gisa, Glorious Resurrector, is an interesting kind of double-sided sword for your opponents, where you get all your creatures. So you get your opponent's creatures back. I keep mixing this up with Lisa or Liesa. So Gisa will stop your opponent's creatures from going to their graveyards. They'll be exiled instead, and then you will gain them, and they will gain Decay. So I like this, but it's a little clunky in a deck like this where we just don't have enough removal, so we're kind of relying on combat in order to get ahead. That being said, I do really like that she's 2 mana, so I don't want to get rid of her, but I think a little more support for her would be interesting. Shadowheart, I think, is fine. This is a sacrifice outlet. It is a very expensive one, and even with the black mana reductions, it does feel like she'd be better off replaced with something like Ruthless Technomancer or Bolas's Disciple, which are just one-shot uses, but don't require, being not summoning sick, and also that 1 mana and tap, and I think those things do add up. Erebos is fine. Diabolic Tutor is, I think, not ideal. I understand the power of tutors, especially when we can cut this down to Demonic Tutor by paying 4 life and then 2 mana. But even then, in a deck like this, I think I'm much happier just casting another draw card. I do note, and the deck builder did talk about, Marcel did talk about this, Blood Celebrant is probably one of the strongest cards in the deck, as it becomes 3 life, add 1 mana of any color, and abilities to tutor this card are good, but I don't know if necessarily Diabolic Tutor is where you want to be. I'm pretty sure something like Profane Tutor is like $1 or $2, and I think it's just going to be much more reliable, and you'll be happier suspending that, or perhaps, Grim Tutor even, over the Diabolic Tutor, which outside of your commander is a clunky card. Foul Renewal is one of those cards when it's 2 ideas stapled together, but instead of being greater than the sum of its parts, it's actually worse. Once again, it only has 1 black mana symbol, which means we can only reduce it to 3. You need a creature in your graveyard to do this, and it needs to be substantial in toughness in order for you to destroy another creature. Do we have universally high toughness? We've got decent toughness, but maybe not enough to guarantee killing the thing you want to kill. Hedron Archive's fine. Rise of Belzenok doesn't really feel like what we want to be doing here. I'm not quite sure why this is here. I get the very nice flavor of it, but it is a card that requires 3 turns, the turn you cast and 2 more turns to get a 6/6 that requires constant sacrifice or it does 6 damage in a deck that is very, very much so, I don't know, it's bleeding a lot. So I don't really see this happening. All right, let's go quickly through the rest of them. 5 mana, there's a lot better things here that I like. Grey Merchant is fantastic. Ogre Slumlord is great. Phyrexian Delver is very good. Corpse Connoisseur feels okay. I really do appreciate that you can basically entomb twice, but why not just play Entomb? Entomb is $5, which is much cheaper than I always thought it was, or something I'm going to suggest later, such as Unmarked Grave, which is just $2. Just lower to the lower mana cost and helps you reanimate cards faster. Endrexar is an interesting creature, but once again, without enough sack outlets, I think this is just kind of a wall of a creature that you're just going to be using the thralls to attack your opponents, and nothing much more than that. Even then, I think you're not going to get reliably that many thralls from it, because honestly, we're still casting like if we're still spending like 5 mana, that's a bad example, but like 3 mana on big creatures, 4 mana on big creatures, we're still going to be limited on the number of thralls we're going to get by multiple casts. So I'm just not very interested in it. And it is just kind of a 2/2 that requires other things to work out. Beacon of Unrest is fine. Final Parting I think works great with the reanimation theme. Yawgmoth's Vile Offering is great in flavor and in practice, or function I should say. Liliana's Contract is a really cute side win con, and I think for that reason I'm fine with it. Open the Graves feels really off theme at this point. We're paying a lot of mana for a deck whose main way of going wide is with token creatures, and all of a sudden we can't even use those to go wide. We have to let our regular creatures to die, and we get a 2/2 for it. I just don't think that's good enough. I think it's a lot of mana. I wouldn't be comfortable paying 3 mana and 4 life for this, much less the full 5 mana, so I would cut that for sure. Revel of Riches is a card I don't tend to like, but it is very good here, and I don't see it as a problem. Notice the difference in these two cards, and I think this is kind of like where I'm noticing some discord in the deck. Open the Graves is a 5 mana enchantment that requires your creatures to die when they're not tokens, and Revel in Riches is a 5 mana enchantment that requires your opponent's creatures to die. It is interesting to me, they don't work together well. They work in opposite ideas, one only caring about your creatures, one only caring about your opponent's creatures, and so this discord is just kind of prevalent, and I think both cards are being held back because the strategy isn't very good, to support both of them. Now, if we're playing something like Plaguecrafter effects, creatures that ETB and each player sacrifices a creature, I think both of these would benefit from that, but we're not, so it's not really worth thinking about too much. Going to 6 mana, we have some demons for sure. We have possibly my favorite Aristocrat's Payoff of Marionette Master. I feel like some of these cards, how many sack outlets do we have? I really feel like a lot of our sacrifice is at 4, almost all of it, right, is at 4 mana and higher. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. I think the majority, if not all of our sacrifices, start at 3 mana or higher, and that's only if I include Doom Necromancer, right? After that, I guess Skull Clamp is the exception, but otherwise, we have all of this middle ground on sacrifice that's just way too high up on the curve. So how are we going to set up this kind of combo, right? Marionette Master works really good with treasure, but we just don't have enough treasure either. I kind of want to lower, and you're going to see this in the additions, I want to lower the curve a little bit so it's something to do in the mid game, but also if you want to go in this kind of Aristocrats game plan, you need more support. This kind of feels like an afterthought. And in fact, I will say that it feels like a bomb, and a lot of the deck feels like a series of bombs that have been put together that don't necessarily work well together. But each individual card has such a high ceiling, but the floor is not great. Demon of Dark Schemes is a great card that when you after a bunch of deaths, you can start reanimating creatures pretty cheaply, 2 and 2 life if Kirk's out. However, you don't have any other energy payoffs, and you don't have a lot of methods to destroy a bunch of creatures outside of targeted removal and Demon of Dark Schemes coming into play. If all the creatures are bigger than 2/2s, it doesn't even do anything. Extractor Demon is another interesting death trigger where you can mill players' cards, you can unearth it. Traditionally, you mill yourself, and we just do not have enough ways to destroy creatures for this to really matter. It could be cool to use the Eldrazi spawn tokens we get from Pawn of Ulamog, but how many are we going to get? And even then, let's say we sacrifice 3, generate 3 mana, mill 6 of our own cards, and then you use the mana on what, right? We could use the mana on another demon in hand, but we already have the Extractor Demon. We already have the means to kind of take advantage of it. We're just milling ourselves for the hope to reanimate with one of our other cards. I don't really buy it. I think this is just a little too clunky. Harvester of Souls is great because it's anyone's creatures and it's a really good ability in a deck like this. Xandrith Demon is am I pronouncing that right? Xanthrid. Xanthrid demon is honestly one of my favorite demons when I started playing, because everyone's a Timmy at one point, and I saw this giant flying demon 7/7, a reference to that original, I can't remember what it's called, but the original big demon that required a sacrifice all the time, but better. And still, it's kind of a bad card, unfortunately. This comes in, like, these cards are back from a day where there was actually this mentality that Black's demons should come at a cost. And that's not a bad idea, but nowadays, and we can just literally compare it to the Demon of Dark Schemes, and maybe this is a downside, but I don't think it is. Now Black just gets good demons, and there's no downside. And so looking at old cards like Xandrath Demon, it just feels not great, right? I feel like you're reasonably gonna run out of sacrifices, or your opponents are gonna set up a situation where let's say you have 3 creatures, it goes to your upkeep and this trigger goes on the stack. Well, I would destroy the non-commander creature you have, right? Keep Xandrath, destroy like whatever you have, and then you're gonna have to sacrifice your commander just to keep Xandrath around. It is not a May. You don't get to choose the 7 damage, and so you just have a 7/7 in exchange for like a much more powerful card. And I would make that deal anytime. I would let my opponent sacrifice Kuruk to keep their Xandrath Demon around. I don't mind another hit for 7 damage. And then after that, if you can't play enough creatures, Xandrath is going to turn on you. It's the whole kind of theme of these demons. Going to the last few, let's see. Oh, because it was going through the wrong pile. Yeah, I keep forgetting that when you play next, it goes into this one. Ever After is fine. I think that's good. Let's finish up with 7. Deathbringer Regent, I think, is great in a deck like this. I think as a board clear, it's very strong. Overseer of the Damned feels like a token producer that's kind of overcosted, but honestly, if this was 5 mana, I would play this, and its effect is very unique. Despite being in like every commander deck forever, I never see this card, and I think it's pretty good. I wonder if you could blink this. Would I play it? I think there is a very reasonable, just like, 5/5 flying, destroy a creature, get a 2/2 is almost good enough, especially at 5 mana. So at 7 mana, and if you could blink this, I would really like this. But in this deck, I like it at 5 mana, so I think this is an easy keep. Necromantic Selection feels like just too much mana. It's just too much mana. It's 7 mana, you're losing your commander. If it's 4 mana, I should say, you're going to lose your commander. I don't think this is what you want. I think you'd just be happier with, you're in mono black, you can use a number of just smaller board clears at like 4 or 5 mana, and you'll just be happier. This feels like the ceiling's really high, but the floor is really, really low. And the true floor of this card is you draw it and you can't even cast it. Scour for Existence, I genuinely do not understand why this is in the deck. It doesn't get reduced by our commander. It is a lot of mana. It does exile, lands. That's something, but I think you have better choices for sure. I've already talked about these two. I think at least Godpharaoh's Gift is interesting, but Elbrus is a lot of work to flip. I think that's an easy cut. Grave Betrayal is like one of my favorite enchantments in black. I would like to keep this. I would like you to play more sacrifice effects on your opponents if you want to keep this, but it is a very, very good card. And Hedonist's Trove is so much text for a bad card. Very, very much so. Cut that card. Those are going to be the things I have to say generally about the deck. And honestly, even then, I'm skipping over a lot of things. What I want to talk about is generally this deck's CMC or its curve, it's just too high. So you're going to notice a trend in my additions that we're going to try to reduce that mana cost, and we're going to try to allow ourselves to get to the mana we need faster. So let's go right into additions. I want to start with the classic, Dark Ritual. When we talk about fast mana, and we're going to talk more about fast mana in a second, we're in black. Dark Ritual is the poster child. This lets you go from 1 to 3, 2 to 4, etc., etc. It is a huge boost in temporary power to enable you to drop something that's incredibly valuable. And in a deck like this, you might be surprised, but being able to play Kuruk on turn 2 is just very, very strong. So I think this is one of the easiest inclusions you can use. You can use it mid-game to cast other things, late game to cast your bombs. You're going to have a good time with this card. But when it comes to fast mana, I want to talk about another card, Blood Pet. This is a card that I see very often in lists, like especially Kirk lists, but other mono black lists, as a form of mana generation or fast mana. Like you play this on turn 1 and turn 3, you have 3 mana. And I'm going to heavily recommend you don't play this card. I know it's in the additions list, but I have it written here, even for me. No, don't play this card. Things that only allow you to go up 1 mana are not worthwhile here. The fast mana aspect of Dark Ritual works because it's such a big jump in mana. Blood Pet, unless you can reanimate it for free turn after turn, that mana is just not going to matter. I'm even going to close it off the list so we never have to see it again. Looking at 2 mana for a little bit of ramp, I'm looking at treasures and a pair of creatures I really like, which are Zhentarim Bandit and Horde Robber. They kind of do the same thing a little bit differently. Zhentarim Bandit, when it attacks, you pay a life and you create a treasure token. And when Horde Robber hits an opponent, you create a treasure token. Both of these creatures I really do like, and I think there's a lot of situations where as long as you're playing in a group or in a situation where there's always one player at least that doesn't have creatures, can't attack, or can't block you, these cards are very, very good. Now, obviously, the Bandit is a little better because you don't have to make contact, but as a 2/1, if they have blockers, you'll get the treasure, but you'll probably lose the Bandit. They're kind of the same card. Like, I think they even out in my mind as they both kind of do the same thing, plus or minus a bit of perks on each side. I think you should play both, because not only are they good 2-mana plays and they're good early game creatures, they'll be able to ramp you and later block. And I think that's an important thing to kind of stick around in a deck like this. In addition, if you keep the equipments, the few equipments that you have, it goes really well with these creatures and you're going to have a pretty good time with them. Looking at 4 mana, it's not often that I suggest this card, but Solemn Simulacrum, maybe I should have an infographic for this as well. Solemn Simulacrum is kind of like an old, cornerstone of Commander. This was the card that was said to be put into every deck. Every deck needs to play this card. This is not a good card that you should play in every deck. However, if you can find a way to take advantage of it, it is a very good card in the right decks. In a deck like this, I like it because the way we take advantage of it is that we can reanimate it. And we do have a few ways to sacrifice it. Solemn Simulacrum is fantastic when repeated. That first 4 mana for just a land tapped isn't great, but once we reanimate it, we're going to feel a lot better because we've already gone neutral with the card when it's died, and we can move on from there. I wish there was some black mana in its, casting cost so we could cheat it out, but since the things we use to reanimate this card have that black mana, it kind of adds up to the same in the end. This is a really nice card, especially when you are kind of struggling mid-game. I know it's the same mana cost as your commander, but you're never casting this before your commander, so it's not a problem. But when you're in that mid-game and you want to kind of push towards the late game, Solemn Simulacrum will be great as a cast, and then a block, and then maybe a reanimate. Speaking of reanimate, there's 2 cards, and I already alluded to one of them that I think are worth playing, and it's Persist and Unmarked Grave. These are just very, very cheap in mana cost, and frankly in dollar value, cards that can really help any general reanimation plan. Persist will reanimate any non-legendary creature, and most of your creatures, if not all, are non-legendary, and Unmarked Grave will entomb any non-legendary card. So both of these cards together can give you a really good 1-2 punch. They can support other cards that you have. They can support the reanimation, or they could reanimate a creature you've lost. I think they're pretty easy to play, and considering they're 1 mana with Kirk out, I think they're very nice additions here. Speaking of ramp, there was a few different mana rocks or pseudo mana rocks I wanted to talk about. Wayfarer's Bauble is one of them. Wayfarer's Bauble is kind of a different cornerstone. I think when I started playing Wayfarer's Bauble, or started getting good at Commander, I should say, Wayfarer's Bauble was sold to me as, it's a better Solemn Simulacrum that every color can run, where Solemn is a 4-mana creature that's a little clunky and doesn't do much. Wayfarer's Bauble comes down on turn 1, and after that, it's basically a rampant growth. And for colors that do not have access to rampant growth, this is a really good thing. So when we're outside of green, Wayfarer's Bauble does pretty good work. I think this is notable as well because both this and Solemn Simulacrum grab you swamps. And with your, it is not Cabal Coffers, it is the other one, which is fair because Cabal Coffers is a lot of money. Cabal Stronghold that cares about basic swamps. Being able to pull those swamps out is going to be nice to empower that card. I didn't put it in here, but I was considering it. I think that's misspelled. Expedition Map is a way of getting Cabal Stronghold, and it might be worth considering. If you feel like in enough games you've got 5 swamps, Expedition Map is like a really good way to capitalize on that. Do note that the deal on Cabal Stronghold is not as good as Cabal Coffers because it costs 1 more. So Cabal Coffers goes even when you have 3 swamps because you're tapping 2 swamps and so you're tapping 3 lands and you're getting 3 mana. Whereas Cabal Stronghold goes even on 4, right? You tap 3 swamps. No, it doesn't because 3 swamps and it would have been 4, but instead only give you 3 blacks. So yeah, Cabal Stronghold only goes even on 5 or more swamps, and it goes positive. So make sure you have those 5 swamps. And if you have those 5 swamps regularly, Expedition Map is very, very good. You're playing 38 lands, which I really like, and this can really accentuate your ability to make mana at a pretty decent price, honestly. Another mana ramp card that I never have a problem with is Mind Stone. This card is pretty low on the floor, and the ceiling is pretty low too, but it's consistent. It is either ramp or it is card draw. It is expensive card draw, but card draw nonetheless. And for that purpose, it's pretty inoffensive and easy to put in a deck like this. I'll leave that up to you. Something I like about 2 mana ramp in a deck that has a 4 mana commander, in this deck a pseudo 4 mana commander, is you can go turn 2 Mindstorm and turn 3 Kirk very, very easily. And so I like that, and I think that is a reason to consider it, but this card's floor is just fine, honestly. Worn Power Stone is a little better. I just wanted to put it out there because if you are thinking about the ramp package a little more, Worn Power Stone is definitely one of the strongest ones. It's not Kodama's Reach or Cultivate, but it's close in theory. It's 3 mana for 2 additional mana, which is what those cards kind of do. And in a deck that is running off of 1 color, and that color can be paid for life with your commander out, I would say it's almost the same thing. Now, I recognize that's not exactly the same thing, but close enough that if you have considered, if you could play Cultivate in this deck, would you? Worn Power Stone here will do a very, very good, impression of it. Next, coming near the end, I want to talk about card draw, because I think that's another thing this deck is sorely missing, and definitely in ways that I really do believe the deck will take advantage of it. Sign in Blood, for example, is a fantastic card. You can get it pretty cheaply, and black, draw 2, lose 2 life is actually pay 6 life, draw 2 cards, and that's really good in the mid game when you just need to keep going. Likewise, though not as free, Read the Bones is another spell that I really do like. Scry 2, draw 2, lose 2 is a really good deal, especially for mid to low power decks, and allows you to see like up to 4 cards, and I do like being able to dig for an answer with it. But I think the one that catches my eye the most is Greed. Greed, once again, it is a 4 mana card, which I know I should be avoiding, but it doesn't work as well without Kirk, so I don't mind it. You're going to cast Kirk first and then this for 3 mana, but as you might be able to math, this is a card that says pay 4 life, draw card. This is a very painful card in Kirk, but it is a very powerful card. I think Greed just doesn't see play, and people don't play it because, let's be frank, Necropotence is better, and honestly, this just exists in this nebulous space where it feels just too much mana for what it does. But for those people, I recommend just trying once to play Greed and then taking a turn where whatever extra mana you have, you just dump into Greed. Because fundamentally, the idea of paying 5 mana and 2 life for 1 card sounds bad, but if you play Greed, let's say someone board wipes, you play Greed, you go a turn cycle, and you leave up 5 black mana. You have 5 black mana open. And you just hold it up and you pass your turn. You go a turn cycle, you figure out if you need to use any removal, but if you end up with that 5 black mana and you just dump it into Greed, you draw 5 cards for 10 life and 9 mana, draw 5 for 10 life. That's a deal I'm starting to feel a little better about. And remember that it doesn't have to be all in one clump, right? I think Greed is pretty good. I guess that's my point. Coming to the end, I have 2 suggestions, and this last suggestion is a collection of cards. Not Dead After All. This is the Feign Death or Undying Evil, Undying Malice collection. These are 1 mana cards that will reanimate the creature you target immediately when it dies. Black does not have Dispel, it does not have 1 mana Hexproof, it doesn't have 1 mana Phase, it doesn't have 1 mana Blink. Instead, it has this. And this is the kind of deck that I think these effects are really, really good in. Not only is this great to protect your commander with, which is, I think, very notable, but also it is very, very good at buying back those ETBs and instant reanimating the creatures that you'd be losing. So for example, losing things like, even Meteor Golem, but I was thinking like Grey Merchant. Your Grey Merchant's about to die, you Feign Death them, you get that entire drain again. They have the demon, I can never remember this thing's name. Overseer of the Damned. This ETB destroy creature, they destroy it, you Feign Death it, you get another trigger, and all of a sudden your opponents are down, one of your opponents is down another big creature. Like, this value is really, really good, and I think this is exactly the kind of deck that can take advantage of these cards. Especially at this mana cost, like at 1 mana, and with Kuruk out, that's free? I can't imagine a better deal. Actually, I can. The last card I will suggest, I don't know how much it costs these days, is Vilis, which I've misspelled. Vilis, Broker of Blood. Okay, this is a $10 card, so I will leave this up to you to decide, but Vilis, Broker of Blood is like the final boss of Kuruk decks. If you get Vilis out, all of a sudden, every time you pay black mana, you draw 2 cards. That's just insane. Do note that milling out is very possible with Vilis, also so is burning through your entire life just because you want to draw every card in your deck. But even then, I think it's good enough. Remember that this ability becomes pay 4 life, draw 4 cards. That's crazy. Like, compare that to Greed momentarily. This is so much better. Necropotence even ain't got nothing on this. When you have Vilis out, you basically can end the game. You can draw into what I would say is probably Grey Merchant and find a way to repeatedly Death Flicker, if that makes sense, where you destroy Grey Merchant, then you reanimate Grey Merchant, then you destroy Grey Merchant until all your opponents are dead. I think that's definitely a way you can win the game, and Vilis is going to carry his weight in blood. I will also note that it is it's a demon, so it fits thematically there, and just thematically all over the place, this is just a great card. Vilis has always been a staple of my Eiley Almost Infinite Life deck, and I think this Vilis should be a staple in most Kuruk decks. And that's where I will leave it. Thank you so much, Marcel, for sending me the deck. I love Kuruk, and I always like the chance of looking at a mono-black version of him instead of him just being in the 99. And I hope the things I've said are helpful, and if you want to send me another draft of this deck, I would be really excited to see it. I really do like Kuruk, and I want to see what direction we can go with him. If we're going to lean more into aristocrats, or we won't. So with that in mind, thank you so much, good luck, and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.